Welcome again to another morning broadcast of kindly old Mr. DuQuette, Rabbi Lamed Ben Clifford. Today we're reading the second part of my article on exorcism from a 2004 article I wrote for Fate magazine. So this is concerning an exorcism that was, I guess, arranged by Francis Israel Regarde, who had a client, who was a psychiatrist that had a client who felt the need for an exorcism. And so this was all sort of very new to me and everything else. But Regarde called me particularly for no greater reason than we knew each other and he knew me well enough. And he also knew that I had a legitimate consecration, apostolic succession consecration. And it actually takes a bishop, at least in the mind of a Orthodox person, it takes a bishop to order an exorcism. So as part of, I guess, the drama that the psychiatrist wanted to provide for her client, the fact that a legitimate bishop, even if it's the wandering bishop tradition, would be needed to order the exorcism. We talked about it yesterday, what the woman's issue was. And if you haven't viewed that, yesterday's little talk, please do. It'll make today's make a lot more sense to you. Once again, I've got both phones on because I'm in the midst of, still in the midst of looking for a new house and such, and I don't want to miss any phone calls. So if I have to interrupt us today, please know that I'll just temporarily stop, and then I'll pick it up in just a few minutes. So that being said, setting the stage. A little before 10 o'clock that night, we arrived at Dr. Kaufman's home in Long Beach. She greeted us cordially and apologized for the way the house smelled. We've had a difficult evening. Since I told Sharon we were doing this tonight, she hasn't been able to hold down any food. She lost her 7-Up when she heard you knock. I guess Garcon doesn't want to say goodbye, she said. Garcon is the name of the at first friendly protective dragon the woman had as a child, imaginary friend to protect her from repeated child abuse, sexual abuse. And then when her perpetrator finally died years later, the dragon sort of turned on her whenever there was any element of sort of natural sexual unfolding in her. The dragon became jealous, like when she was attracted to boys and stuff. Like the dragon literally became a demon, that a jealous demon, if you will. But anyway, she ushered us into the kitchen where we met Sharon, an attractive woman in jeans and ski sweater. Her complexion was pasty, and she wore tinted glasses that hid the dark circles under her eyes. She thanked us for coming and asked what she would need to do. Now, Nathan, this is whom I'm calling Nathan Sanders, was the operator. Okay, I arranged the exorcism. I'm a bishop. I arranged the exorcism. And I would assist with the exorcism. But Nathan was the exorcist himself. So he was captain on this exorcism ship. Nathan asked her a few questions and had me construct 4 paper talismans with Garcon's magical signature drawn on one side and the pentagram of Solomon on the other. Now, elsewhere in, I believe, Low Magic, I go into greater detail about how I constructed the sigil. We used a kamea, or a magic square of Saturn, and put Garcon's, connect the dots to create Garcon's sigil on a kamea of Saturn. Saturn, we judged, was most appropriate for binding and restricting and such. That was just a decision we made. So we made 4 talismans with Garcon's magical sigil drawn on one side and the pentagram of Solomon on the other. The 4 of us would wear these around our necks, the 4 of us being Nathan, myself, Sharon, and the psychiatrist, Dr. Kaufman. This venerable technique of Kabbalistic magic that forms a link to the spirit with the symbol derived from the letters of its name. We spent the next half hour bringing things in from the car, and the car was a Volkswagen Bug, and it had all this stuff in it. In addition to Nathan's beautifully constructed breakdown magical circle and triangular black mirror, we brought 4 black robes and every magical tool a well-equipped Solomonic magician would need. If Sharon needed a show, she was certainly going to get one. Nathan asked Dr. Kaufman and me to wash our hands and faces before putting on our robes. As for himself, he would take a shower. When he reappeared from the bathroom, he was decked out in his full magical regalia. He looked every inch a medieval exorcist. Finally, he presented Sharon her robe and instructed her to shower and wash her hair. It was nearly midnight before she emerged from the bathroom. She had towel-dried her hair and looked like a frightened little girl. There wasn't room for all 4 of us in the circle of art, so we created a larger outer circle with a length of clothesline. Sharon stood in the center circle holding 2 lighted tapers. The triangular black mirror was placed outside of both circles and positioned so that she could easily see the reflection of her own face illuminated by the candles. Nathan stood just behind her in the central circle. He would act as operator, and Sharon, the receiver. Dr. Kaufman and I stood in the outer circle on either side and slightly behind Sharon. We all wore our sigil pentagram talismans and a parchment hexagram of Solomon pinned to the skirt of our black robes. And those were just paper hexagrams. Nathan ran down a checklist of items to see if all was in readiness. Was the phone off the hook? Were the doors locked? Did anyone need to use the restroom? When he was satisfied, he lit 2 candles in Sharon's hands and turned out all the lights. Before he entered the circle, he unwrapped a tiny cake of hotel soap and drew a large version of Garcon's sigil, the same sigil we all wore around our necks. He drew that in the center of the black mirror. And the mirror itself was triangular in shape. This act, the act of drawing Garcon's sigil on the mirror, made Sharon gasp sharply as if someone had seized her throat. I was no longer nervous. I was afraid. Your Grace, would you be so kind as to banish the temple with the rituals of the pentagram and hexagram? Now Nathan was calling me Your Grace. This was more than a kind gesture. It reaffirmed in Sharon's mind that the ceremony was duly officiated. I didn't mind. Besides, the banishing rituals were something simple I could do to look helpful. I have to confess, they also helped calm me down and feel prepared for what was to follow. After I banished, Nathan performed a brief cleansing and consecration ceremony and formally declared the temple open. He asked Sharon to take several deep breaths, relax, and gaze at her reflection in the triangle. He then began to recite the classic conjuration. I do invocate and conjure thee, O thou spirit Garcon. And being with the power armed with the majesty, I do strongly command thee, and on and on and on. Nathan used a special voice for his conjuration. It was deeper and stronger than his natural voice, but gave no hint of artificial affectation. His words rode smoothly upon on 2 or 3 notes. Whenever the text ran into pockets of bizarre-sounding names and words, he linked them together smoothly into a sonorous string, almost as if they were one long master word of unspeakable power. By Beryllinensis, by Balachensis, by Paramachia and Apologia, by the most powerful genii Lacede in the ministers of the Tartarian abode, and by the chief of the seat of Apologia in the 9th Legion, I do invoke, and by invoking conjure thee. All the while he conjured, he held his wand high above Sharon's head and drew angelic sigils in the air. And being armed with the power of the most supreme majesty, I do strongly command thee, by him who spake and it was done, and unto whom all creatures be obedient. Nathan hadn't even finished the first section when Sharon started to weave back and forth and let out pitiful sobs. Nathan went on, but his voice was soon drowned out by Sharon's whimpering. He continued louder and louder. By all the names of God, Adonai, El Elohim, Eloha, Ehea, Ashar, Ehea, Zabaoth, Elion, Yah, Tetragrammaton, Shaddai, Lord God Most High, I do exorcise thee and do fully command thee, O thou spirit Garcon, that thou dost forth appear unto us before this circle in a fair human shape, without any deformity or tortuosity. Sharon was now thrashing from side to side, sobbing uncontrollably. I was certain she was faking it. She had seen too many movies, I thought. The noise and the commotion were too much for Nathan. He stopped and shouted at Sharon, "Is the spirit in the triangle?" "Yes," Sharon screamed angrily. "He's always been there." When I heard those words, I knew she was not acting. I felt the hair on the back of my head spring to attention. The atmosphere in the room seemed to collapse under a crushing wave of pure primitive malice. I was petrified. Sharon dropped her hands forward, spilling hot wax down the front of her robe and onto the carpet. I stepped forward and lifted her hands back into position. When I touched her arms, I found them hard as rock. Her wrists and hands were swollen to such a degree that her fattened fingers could barely close around the candlesticks. I stole a quick glance at her face. It was bright red, and her cheeks were so puffed up that her eyes were nearly pinched shut. With the tip of his wand, Nathan prodded me back to my station and commenced to address the spirit directly. Even in this chaotic environment, he calmly welcomed Garcon and praised him for all of his years of service to Sharon when she was a little girl. He went on to explain that Sharon was now grown up and his actions were now hurting her. Sharon stopped crying and began to let out an extended monotone howl of "No, no." She held the note until her breath was exhausted. As she pushed the last air from her lungs, she induced a cycle of coughing that eventually led to retching spasms of dry heaves. Dr. Kaufman and I had to take the candles away from her. Nathan shouted at her, "Look into the triangle. Is Garcon in the triangle? Tell me what he is saying." "Oh, yes," Sharon hissed in a venomous sarcasm. "He's laughing at you." It was now clear that Garcon could not be drawn into dialogue. The spirit's only response was to create terror and then feed upon that terror. He was doing a good job and getting stronger by the second. Poor Sharon bobbed up and down like a caged monkey, shifting from foot to foot as she gawked open-mouthed at the triangle. From where I stood, it appeared she no longer had a neck. Her shoulders had risen and become squared. I remember thinking that it looked like she'd put on her robe with a coat hanger still in it. Nathan tried once more to reprogram Garcon to become a supportive familiar, but Garcon would have none of it. His response was always the same: more pain and terror inflicted upon Sharon. The exorcist then moved things to the next level. "Then if you refuse to help her, you will no longer be allowed to hurt her." Under the heading "The Dragon Cast Out," Nathan popped the cork on a crystal vial of holy water and shook it first upon Sharon and Dr. Kaufman and me, then upon the triangle itself. "Now, O Garcon, since thou art still pernicious and disobedient, I do in the name and by the power and dignity of the omnipresent and immortal Jehovah Tetragrammaton bind thee in the depths of the bottomless abyss." I was very impressed. Nathan had all of this classic sections of the Key of Solomon put to perfect memory. It was really impressive, okay, but I was still scared shitless. He emptied the vial of holy water over Sharon's head and then ripped the parchment talisman bearing Garcon's sigil from around her neck. He reached to where I stood with a lighted candle and passed the talisman through the flame. "I conjure thee, O fire, by him who made thee and all other creatures for the good of the world, that thou torment, burn, and consume this spirit Garcon for everlasting." He then allowed the talisman to catch fire and held it until it was almost consumed. He tossed the last flaming fragment in the air, and it fell like a shooting star directly in front of the black mirror and burned completely out before it reached the floor. I was very impressed. Predictably, Sharon howled and babbled. Nathan then stepped between her and the mirror, and from the confines of the circle, he hurled a black cloth at the triangle. It snagged at the uppermost point and fell to cover the entire surface of the mirror. He turned Sharon away from the triangle and gently helped her to the floor. He raised his wand, aimed it at the covered mirror, and recited the final curse in the Enochian angelic language. Christios cornfa peripsal ama ils. Christios ror grey tofglo aoeve ama ils. Christios lesiftias o tofglo pir peripso amna nan ils pujo iel dies apila od pujomir adfat. Let the company of heaven curse thee. Let the sun, moon, and all the stars curse thee. Let the light and all the holy ones of heaven curse thee, unto the burning flame that liveth forever, and unto the torment unspeakable. The aftermath. Nathan sat down beside Sharon and put his arms around her. We all remained silent for what seemed like a long time. He then helped her to her feet and showed her the covered mirror. That's it, he said cheerfully, all gone. You'll never be this embarrassed again. Thank you for not throwing up on my robe. Sharon laughed and hugged him. We all laughed and hugged. I'll digress enough to say that breaking into laughter is the supreme exorcism. We all laughed and hugged. Your Grace, will you do the honors? Nathan really enjoyed his role as exorcist. He had done a fantastic job, and I was the proudest bishop in Southern California. I quickly performed the banishing rituals, after which Nathan closed the temple. The entire ceremony was conducted in less than an hour. We were all in high spirits. Dr. Kaufman told Sharon that during the ceremony she had blown up like a blimp, and I was relieved to learn that I wasn't the only one to notice the phenomenon. Dr. Kaufman apologized for forgetting to tell us that for years Sharon's joints swelled dramatically during Garcon's attacks. In fact, it was these physical manifestations that first attracted her to the case. It was 2 weeks before I heard back from Dr. Kaufman. In her opinion, the exorcism was a success. Garcon seemed to be out of Sharon's life, and she was making progress on all other levels of her therapy. I called Nathan, and we crowed like self-congratulatory cocks. I then called Rigardi and tried not to sound too excited. He said that he had already talked with Dr. Kaufman, and she had praised us to high heaven. He was happy that it worked out, but cautioned me about celebrating prematurely. His parting words left me a bit uneasy. The laws of conservation of energy applies to magic as well as physics. Our friend may not have been destroyed. He may have just moved on to the nearest center of least resistance. Rigardi's words became terrifyingly prophetic. 2 years later, I would receive another call from Dr. Kaufman. Sharon was doing fine. She had just earned her PhD and was enjoying the best health. However, her teenage son, Robert, had just committed suicide, and there was something very frightening happening at her house. But that's another story. So that's the end of today's reading. For today, it's a little longer than yesterday. Tomorrow, if I don't find another magazine article, I think I'm going to take a chance and read my screenplay novel, Aleister Crowley, Revolt of the Magicians. We'll see. Wishes continual and continued luck. Or no, I guess change our luck in finding a new place. So we're still looking, and it's still dominating our lives like a background meditation of anxiety. But we'll live through it. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. See you tomorrow.